All right, folks, it's Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. It's Reel Unfiltered Talk. I am James Bryant. And if you've been following the news for the last 10 or 12 days, you realize we lost our friend and our co-host, Dion Hibden. So tonight, I don't want to get into a lot of sad stories or anything that's like down or low. We've all had our grieving for the last 10 days. And I thought tonight I might talk a little bit about how I met how I met the Hibden family and how Dion got into my life with all of us and the guys here as well. Just want to give a little history about where we are and where we're going. So it was about, and for the first time ever, Dion and I never made a script. We did everything off the cuff, but I had so much I tried to want to jam into one show because I was talking to some friends of mine. They said it might be a 4-part show, but I'm going to condense it way down. It was about 19, and again, guys, there's 20-some years worth of stories here that I'm going to condense into one show tonight. So the timeline's going to be a little off, and the stories aren't going to be completely accurate. But like Dion and I always said, it's up to you guys to determine what is true or not. So here we go. I met Stella Hibden back in 1998. We were in the giftware manufacturing business, my parents and myself. Actually, my parents were, and I was an employee. But Dad and I have been fishing a lot of tournaments, and we felt like we were doing pretty good, and I thought I'd take a shot at fishing Pro Tour. So we were in our gift shop, and we were talking about it, and I've said the story before. This Barbara Bush character came up to me, and she said, if you want to know about fishing, I can tell you everything you want to know. And I said, well, who are you? And she said, well, my name is Stella Hibden. And it was that moment I knew I hit the golden goose, because to have that kind of information and that kind of woman in front of you was people who had dreamed of that stuff. So they talk about being inside the Hibden inner circle or being outside of the Hibden circle. That was the beginning of the intro of learning how to be in that circle. So, hey, thanks, Ed. Ed, my beer guy. So thank you there. So I got to go into their house, and they had this beautiful home down in RA, which is about 5 miles south of where we're at today in our building here at Legends and Liars Club. But the whole process began of, do you have the right equipment? Do you have the right stuff? And I thought a lot about how we've come along in the sport in the last 25 years versus where we are now. And, back then, we've talked about it, pros got their boats at a discount or free, or their motors were free. So if you could be fortunate enough to buy a boat from a pro, you could save yourself tens of thousands of dollars. And I got lucky enough to be on one of those first stints where I could buy a boat from the Hibden family. And in 2000, I think a 520 Ranger with a 225 on it was 20 grand. And that got you into fishing much more affordable than it is today. And I think back about, we always try to share these older stories, but it made me realize today while I was writing down my notes how much harder it is for a fisherman to get into fishing, because those tools aren't available to you like they used to be. So for us, 20,000 is still a lot of money, but got you in a boat with warranty and you could go fishing on the tour. Of course, you need a truck, you need tackle. So that's where Stella came in by marrying me in with Guido. And Guido, started the process of the schedule and where you're going to go, how you're going to catch fish. And again, we've got a short amount of time, but we studied it all. And the first time I met Dion, they had this, and if anybody's ever been and heard about their shops, they were like a cathedral to a fisherman. They had these overhead doors where both bass boats could fit on one side of the garage, and they had all their tackle lined up, and then they had a little side garage where they had their UTVs and their hunting gear, but you went into an enclosed room in the same garage, and that was the shop. And when you went in there, they both had their office desk, they had tackle making equipment and all those things, and that's, if you could get in there, that's where the secrets were told, and that's where the information came from, and it was super awesome. And the first time I met Dion by himself, I went in there, and he was actually holding a gun and looking out the back window while he was pouring jigs, tying skirts, whatever. He might not have been doing any of it, but what he was doing was he was hunting. So he was deer hunting out of the office, out of the back garage. So we started talking about some of the lakes he had fished on, and I started learning about how they could tell stories. And he would tell stories about where he fished on certain lakes and what worked for him and when I was going, and these are the things you need to do. And again, guys, this was before there was waypoints and GPS, so we looked at paper maps, and it was right on the cusp of GPS, but then that was the first time I met Dion. So went on the road, and if you guys have ever watched a show before, I fished 2 years in 2002 and 2003, Finished about 199th out of 200 in 2 years. Never cashed a check. We didn't do very good. And during that time, and I wouldn't call it a trade-off, but if anybody's paying attention to some of the tribute, hold on. It says we're going. There it goes. So he would set a schedule and we would go fishing, and we'd take kids fishing. So I was telling Amy and the guys last week about a story that happened to me, and I kind of want to share it with everyone. Have you heard it? You've heard it. Maybe we told it on the air though. So we were up on Truman Lake. Prior to the tournament, I had this old beat-up Chevrolet truck, an old regular cab four-wheel drive with a big 3-inch lift on it. I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I had a nice boat and that Dad had paid for, because you got to have your sponsors, right? So we're going to go up to Truman that morning, and we're going to take some kids fishing. And I got about halfway up 135, which is halfway between Lake of the Ozarks and Truman, and I lost my transmission. So I called Dion's wife, Jill, at the first time and said, hey, I'm broke down. I can't do it. And she's like, nah, you can't get out that easy. So they shuffled cars, came and got me, drugged me up to Truman, we go fishing. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to teach kids how to take their equipment. Because Guido would always say, if you take, it doesn't matter how many fish you catch, but if you don't get back to the weigh-in, it ain't worth a damn. You got to take care of your stuff. That was Guido's approach. Dion's not so much. So we're out there on the water, and we're up by Long Shoal area, and if anybody knows Truman Lake, you can look on a map. And I was fishing with these kids in the Cedar Grove, and I was explaining there was a lot of stobs and stick-ups and laydowns. And I was explaining to these kids, when you're out here fishing, you got to take care of your stuff. You got to fish hard, but you got to take care of your stuff so you can get back. And about this time, I hear this roar coming across the lake. And out of nowhere, here comes this big Chevrolet boat, and it's cranked on its side, and it goes and it shuts down, and it jumps over a log, and splashes, and then it rolls over some logs, back and forth, boom, boom. And the kids are going, hooray! And it's Dion Hibden. And I thought, son of a bitch. And these kids look at me like, what's up, Grandpa? How come we can't be in his boat? So I thought, damn. So later on, I caught up with him at the tournament. I'm like, hey, man, I was trying to teach his guys a lesson. And he said, well, you taught him wrong. He's like, you got to go where the fish are, man. He said, that's how Dad does it. He said, but we're not finessing on Truman. We're catching fish. You either get there or you don't. And you just got to fix your stuff later. So I'm like, all right. So we kind of started that bantering back 20-some years ago. Fish the deal. As we know, it didn't work out. There's a time and a place whenever you realize maybe you're not cut out for all of that. And mine was, we had got back from, I think it was our 4th or 5th tournament of the year on the second year. And I was in my shop, and my parents had a wonderful shop where we could pull our truck and trailer through a double-ended garage in the back of our business, and sitting back there and unpacking everything and just not feeling it. It's like, so Stella comes over. She flips over a 5-gallon bucket, sits down. She says, son, have a seat. And she looks across me and she says, what the F is wrong with you? And I said, Stella, this isn't fun. She's like, it's not supposed to be fun. This is a business, and your business is to catch 5 fish for 4 days and cash a check. If you can't do that, you just got to figure out something else. And she went telling stories about how she used to, I shouldn't say hawk, they would forego their last house payment and use that payment to go fishing because it was that important. And they knew that they were going to make it big and they were going to win checks, and that was the sacrifice that they made. And it was that point I realized that's not my style. That's for some of the other guys, but not for me. So that year we took our entry fees and I hung it on a wall in about 600 square foot of my parents' shop, and Osage Tackle Company was born. So we started in the tackle business, and things were going pretty decent. Not decent, but okay. So we started doing fundraisers for kids fishing, and Stella said, I'll have the boys do seminars. So the storytelling began in our little store up 135 where Gian and Dion would come in, and they would do these free seminars for fishermen. And we'd have 50, 60 guys would come to these events, and they would just tell all the stories that you've heard Dion tell for the last year and a half on the show. But it was live, and it was right there. And the second time that Dion and I got a little more engaged, we weren't friends at the time. We knew each other. We did things, but we weren't friends. I would more say acquaintances, and I was really close with Stella and Guido. But he was there in the background kind of doing his thing. And at the time, my grandfather was 80, probably 80 at the time. And we were doing a fundraiser, and we called it Crankbait Casino. And we had this really cool idea that we would hang a bunch of crankbaits on the wall, brand new. Everybody play around the poker and put in $1, and whoever won, they could pick a crankbait off the wall. We would keep the money and give it to the kids for fishing. So it was a win-win. But my grandfather kicked Dion's ass in poker, and it bothered him up until like 2 years ago. He'd always say, he's like, you remember when your grandpa beat me? And I think he was cheating. I think it was this. I think it was that. I'm like, no, he just beat your ass, man. And so we started to connect a little bit more there. And it was kind of a more of a friendly back and forth. Hey, we're not so bad. He started bringing his friends into our old store. We saw Kenyon Hill and Peter T. and those guys would all come in and go hunting. He'd bring them by the store, and these relationships started to be formed. So it was kind of fun. So fast forward into the middle 2000s, a little bit later, I think it was around 2005, 2006, we had the opportunity to come here to where we're at today. And this is a 5,800 square foot facility, and it had a bunch of walls and combobulations. And our buddy Ed, my beer guy, we've spent the last 3 or 4 days tearing down more walls, trying to make it bigger. But Stella came in and literally helped us remove walls, tear things down, and helped us build our store because the boys were off fishing. We've gotten a good relationship going, and that's what she did. And she stayed. She worked. You know, she helped us with stuff. She had some history with tackle, connections, suppliers, all those things. So it was nice to have her around at that time. So during that, and again, don't get my ears all squared out, but Stella and I were always trying to figure out, along with Dad's disapproval because he thought we were crazy most of the time, that we were going to find the way to get rich really fast and successfully. So one day we're sitting around the store and I said, Stella, I've got it. We're going to start a tackle business and we're going to name it after you. And she's like, what the hell are you talking about? And I said, well, they know the guys, but you're the boss. So let's do Mama Stella Bates. Because everyone on the tour called her Mama Stella. And she's like, son, that's not going to work. And I'm like, no, it's going to be great because everyone fears you and adores you. And it's like, there's no female like figureheads and there's a lot of legends out there. You're just as big of a legend as they are. So let's try it. So we printed up bags. We went down at the time, we contracted with Lucky Strike to make our baits. We went down there and we bought a bajillion baits. Most of them were Cinco style baits, worms, the traditional stuff. And we decided we would go to the FLW World Championship in Alabama. I want to say it was about 2008 maybe. Don't get me cold up, but right in that ballpark. We set up a Vegas-style booth, like you've never seen. Bags were 30 deep, and we had every color in the rainbow, and it was awesome. And I'll never forget this because Forrest, come here. And Forrest Wood would walk into the booth, like, meet James Bryant, we're out there doing this stuff. And we take pictures, and there's Hank Parker, and here's George Cochran, and here's David Fritz, and then the boys would get off the water of the day, and she would flag the anglers in, and I'll find them. I have them. I tried to find them for tonight, but I have these pictures. So I got all these photos, and we had this great idea. We never sold a single bag of baits. Not one bag. 3 days, not one bag. I've learned since that when you go to a world championship tournament like the Classic or FLW or MLF, whatever it's called now, most people that go, they kind of want the free stuff. They want samples and handouts. We were there to sell. Huge failure. So we brought it all back, and I think it took us about 8 years to get rid of it. But rewind back to the day we went to Lucky Strike USA, and it was my dad, Stella, Guido, and myself. Dion wasn't there. Don't believe. And we are buying baits by the thousands, like 1,000 of each color. And we're negotiating as we go. And back in the day, John Hendricks, I think it's John. Is that his name? John Hendricks was the owner. And he was walking along with us. And, he's getting his stuff for himself. And he's loading up stuff. And they would take it over this way. And we're piling up stuff. And they're taking it that way. And John had pallets and pallets and pallets of tackle that I don't know where he bought it from or what he did with it, but it was piled everywhere. And one of these pallets was a 6-foot pallet tall full of bass jigs. And they looked like they were slated to be sent to Walmart. But in the top of it was a custom-made jig tying tool. And it was made of aluminum. It had a clamp, and you could clamp open your skirts. You could build them and then unclamp it. And I said, look at that. And Guido said, what is that? And I said, that's a jig tying tool. And he's like, let me see it. So he looked at it. And he says, well, let's just take this, and we'll take it back up front, and we'll buy it later. I said, okay. So We get back up to his main conference room. We've got all these baits out. We've negotiated price, and we're talking about business and what's going on and all this stuff. And I said, hey, I set this up on the table, and I said, we found this in the back. How much do you want for it? He says, how much you got? I reached in my pocket and had a $20 bill, and I put it across the table. And he smacked it and he grabbed it and put it in his pocket. And Guido goes, hey, now, what about? And I said, no, it's mine. Well, I bought it. And he goes, are you going to let me use it? And I said, no. To this day, I never let him use it because I knew we would never get it back. Because Hibdons love them, but so it's still here. You guys ever want to see the story of the magic skirt tying tool? I still have it, and I never let him use it. And he was kind of mad about that, but in a nice way, but not loaning it to him. Fast forward through, we're plugging along, business is going good, and the Lions Club here at the lake used to have a white bass tournament. So at the time, Dion's boys were probably, if not maybe 10, but somewhere between 10 and 13 years old. 2 twins and then Peyton. Well, the Hibdons only had 2 boats, only 2 guys, Guido and Dion, so they needed extra guys to take the boys fishing. So I get the call, will you take one of the boys fishing? It's an honor, would love to. And Dion says, well, before we do this, we're going to have to go fishing because you suck, and I'm going to have to go show you how to catch white bass so that the boys aren't embarrassed. I'll take it. A day fishing on the water with Dion is like a dream come true for me. So I thought, let's do this. So we went on to the Gravois, we go into Indian Creek, and we're going along these points, and he's showing me where to look for schools. And that day, he taught me 2 incredible things, which we've talked about them before, but I'm going to share it again. He says, you've really got to watch the seagulls this time of year. And I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, if they're setting, and they're just sitting there swimming, they're not eating. But if they're flying in circles and they're dive bombing and eating bait, there's fish underneath them because that's activity. And those seagulls see those other fish, and you can always follow the seagulls and find those fish. I'm like, that's pretty cool. 3 things actually I learned. The second thing was we went out in the middle of the lake, and the seagulls all taken off, and we couldn't find the shad. So Dion takes his boat, and he makes about 5 giant circles. And what he did was he churned up the shad, and then the white bass raised up and started feeding right in front of us, and we started catching them again. And while we're out there, he says, you want to see another one? I said, sure. He said, if you ever make a big run and you're bouncing around down the lake and your live well runs dry because it drains out, he said, turn your wheel all the way to the left, put it in reverse, and make a reverse circle. And the prop will force the water back through and force fill your tank. He said, but do it out in the middle of the lake because if you do it in shallow water, you're going to turn up mud and hot water. But if you're out there in the middle of the lake and you're making a 30, 40, 50-mile run, just stop, back up in a couple circles, force feed it back full, and take off again. So he showed me how to do that day. It was pretty cool. So that was the first time I started to learn Hibdon tricks. These are things that you can do because people don't think about it. And they had a way of saying things very simply that you can understand. So we catch a few more white bass, and he said, I got another one for you. I don't know if you guys have heard this story or not, but he said, find me a little bobber, some string. So I dug around my boat, and I found a little cork. And he says, my dad always talked about this. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to hook a little hook in this white bass. We're going to put about 15 feet of line on him and a bobber, and when we turn him loose, he'll swim back to the school. And we'll always know where the school is. I'm like, dude, that's genius. So I pull off like 15 feet of line, and we put the little hook on, and we put the little bobber, and we turn him loose, and he goes, whoosh, gone. No bobber, nothing. And we sit there for like what seemed like 10 minutes, but it's probably 30 seconds. He looked over me and said, I'm going to tell you 2 things. Number 1, we need a lot more line. And number 2, don't ever tell anybody that I did this. And I said, okay. So I'm breaking the rule. We did that. But in theory, if you put 50 feet of line out, I guess what you need to do is you need to see how deep the lake is when you're out there, and then come up about 10 feet and use that much line. And that way you'll always see your bobber. We failed that day, but we had a good laugh about it, so it was kind of nice. So, fast forward a few more years, Stella moves away. She's going to go live with her daughter down in Alabama, and I fast forwarded quite a few years, but we did that, and Dion joins the store. So he slowed down a little bit, and he's looking for something to do, and we needed some help, so he says, you mind if I come in, start working with you guys? Hell yeah. It's great. Who wouldn't want a Bassmasters Classic champion working in your store? It's super awesome. Kinda. I've always said that Dion was really great with, he would teach kids how to use a bait caster. We sold more bait casters when Dion was here because people would say, I don't know how to use it. And he says, well, 15 minutes out back and we'll get you going. And it was true. They would come back in and be smiling. It's like, hey, we had the pro fisherman show us how to use a bait caster, and it was like super awesome. Dion, however, had trouble with math. Could not count to 12 because if somebody wanted 2 dozen minnows, they got 15 dozen. Because it's not that he couldn't count, he just didn't care. He was like, if I'm going to scoop minnows, they're going to get a black bag full of fish, and they did. So I probably lost more money on bait than I did paying him to be here because he gave away a ton of bait. Standing joke, and we talked about it 3 weeks ago because we were talking about different ways to sell bait. And I said, no matter how we do it, you can't do it because you give too much. And he said, I know, and I had fun doing it because I like jacking with you. And I'm like, it's funny. Ha ha ha, it's funny. So yeah, he did that too. I'm going down my notes here. Late in life, I had a son. His name is Sam. You guys have probably seen him bobbling around on the podcast from time to time. And Dion loved him. And Dad and Dion and I raised him in the store since he was 6 weeks old. And it was a lot of fun. They got to play together. And, the term Uncle D's around. We had Uncle D, Uncle Kevin. Now we got Big Ed and Big Ron and Rod and the gang. And so it became the men's group. And Sam got to be a part of it. It was really fun having him around to do that. It was good. And then during that whole time, Dad and Dion would challenge each other about old lures, identifying. We made him take apart his own reels because he wanted to learn how to clean them. Because all those years, he would junk up a reel, but he'd always give it to somebody else to clean or fix. So we'd like, take it apart. And I really think he enjoyed that. I think one of the things later I think I discovered why he was so terrible with live scope is his eyesight was bad because he got his eyes fixed like 2 months ago. So I shouldn't have gave him such a hard time, but I think he could see. I don't think he could see as well on some of the smaller things, but he did enjoy taking those reels apart, and that was kind of fun. So how did we get to the podcast? Somebody asked me that the other day, and I really couldn't remember it, but then it dawned on me. There was a tackle company that we used to buy tackle, and it was just a few blocks behind where the Triton manufacturing plant is in Midway, Arkansas. So we decided to take a trip down there. I said, do you want to go with me and check out tackle? And I said, sure. So we put in an order. We drive down there, and on the way, he starts telling me about how many thousands of times he's traveled 5 Highway. He could tell you every inch, curve, corner, rock, because they would go and get boats at Ranger. They would go to Ranger meetings. It was right there at Flippin, which is really close to Midway. And he would tell about all these stories of traveling 5 Highway, and they were great. So we did this 2 or 3 times, and I started thinking to myself, we need to record these stories because they're awesome. The story I've always told about 9/11, I've told it at the funerals, I've told it at the podcast. That was in the car going down 5 Highway, and I said, tell me what the craziest thing you've seen is. I thought I was going to surprise him by saying I saw a 40-pound rat, which turned out to be a nutria, which I didn't know what nutrias were in Texas, which he made fun of me, but we both seen space shuttles. He was at 9/11, and all these conversations came. We were side by side driving down in a truck going down 5 Highway. A story he never told on the air was, he said when he was a younger kid, he went down and his dad was picking up a boat at Ranger, and Nina, who was Forrest's wife, said, Dion, go down, grab a dually truck from service and take it over to the farm. And she's like, okay. So she goes down. He said Ranger had a shop behind the shop, and there was dually trucks that they pulled bass boats all over the country with. So it was a fleet of trucks. There were some really nice ones, and there were some really rough ones. And he went down, he got one of the service guys, and he said, hey, Nina wants me to take a truck to the farm. And they said, did she say what she wanted it for? He said, no. He said, take it to the farm. They said, we better take this old one. So he gets the oldest one and goes out there. And when she gets there, she's like, put the truck in 4 low. And then there was one of their younger grandsons that were there. And they said, all of the Wood family was in the back of this truck and had shotguns. And he says, you get behind the steering wheel, put it in 4 low, and just run right down this hayfield, down this windrow. And what they were doing is they were flushing out possums. And they were all having a melee, killing possums in the field. And he said, my first trip out there, I was expecting to go check out the boats and have a good time. We ended up at the farm shooting possums. And they were cool stories. They were really cool stories. And once he started telling about those stories, and being a kid, not being able to fish the classics, helping the guys on the ground. The earlier Bassmasters Classics guys, Forrest Wood supplied all the boats. They were all identical boats, but I never even realized and it's some common sense things. People or Ranger at the end of the day had to gas up all the boats and put more oil in them and, fix the broken parts that day. And so they had a crew of guys that did that at every tournament. And Dion got to be one of the guys that got to go help. And I think he told a story once about going and picking up Forrest, and I think it was an astronaut, something like that. But he was down there helping the service crew when he got the call to go do that. But he said he never realized how important that actually was later whenever he got a boat, because he said there were some anglers that were very demanding. You've got the cocky, arrogant ones that say, here's my boat, get it ready, get my stuff, and that was that. But they all remembered the fact that he helped them gas and oil boats, and so he had a great relationship with them at the factory, so he always got extra care. And, they treated him with respect, and he did the same. So it talked a lot about his characters he went through as a professional angler doing those things, which was a neat story that he had told. Let's see. So we start the podcast. We start out, two of us, over on the other side by the minnow tanks, and Amy and one of her friends were there and drinking wine, and we started our podcast, and we never had a script, and we never knew what we were going to do, and we just start off and go. And you guys know this now that, we started off with no fans. Now we have 4, and it's awesome. 6. Sorry, there's 6, 7. We filled the house a few times, and it was good. There were always 3 podcasts that people don't realize we had. We had the pre-show. Dion would roll in early, and he would sit down out here in the crowd with the guys, get caught up on everything, and a lot of times it wasn't about fishing, just seeing how you guys were doing, ask you guys seen any deer, usual stuff, and then we do our podcast. And he still, as much as I wanted him to be unfiltered, he wasn't, because he still wanted to be part of the industry and still wanted to be part of that outer industry circle, and never wanted to insult anybody and never wanted to say anything bad. So we did an unfiltered show that was 70% filtered. But I tried to provoke him, poke him, whatever I could do. He held a good fight, and we teased each other a lot. But when the show was over, he became very unfiltered, and he would say exactly what we thought. So the guys that were here in the crowd, they actually got to see it firsthand, which was super cool. So I realized later, and I was telling Amy this, that we have this really crappy software program that we've been using. That's why sometimes the show works, sometimes it doesn't. It's because we ran a $100 a month sponsorship from Lloyd to Hiawatha Beach, and that was about the best we could buy. So we ran on a shoestring budget, and we did that. But when I start a stream, just for everybody to know, I start the YouTube stream, but then I have to hit a start stream with a software that broadcasts it to YouTube. But it also has a record button that automatically comes on. So this computer kept slowing down because I didn't realize I never stopped recording. So I have a whole computer full of after hours audio. So I told Amy I'm going to go through it, and at some point we might air, with her blessing, some of the unfiltered things that she deems appropriate for us to air. So we'll cross that road when we get there, but we're all going to have a lot of beer of an evening, and we're going to go through this content and see what's good and what's bad. So, because there was some good stuff, but we talked a lot about family, and we talked a lot about the kids, and when the show was over, and every single night he'd always say, is there anything I can do for you? And I always say something very inappropriate to him, and he would leave. So that was how we always ended our shows. So guys at Getter got to see 3 shows. It was kind of cool. So in the middle of that, we decided to fish tournament. So we thought we needed to get out there and fish a little bit. And he had a couple health issues and was rebounding from it, but he was doing really well. And we thought, we'll go fish. So we've all heard about the infamous Angry Pirate tournament where he caught a 6.5 pounder and a 6 pounder off the same dock. And at the conclusion of this show, I'm going to air his 6.5 pound catch live, so anybody that hadn't seen it will be able to see it. And there is some profanity. I'm just warning you guys ahead of time. That'll be there too. And it's good stuff, but I'll air it too. He would come to birthday parties. I'm going to keep this very G-rated. My dad, when I was little, convinced me that I had a twin brother, imaginary brother. And Dion and Amy took the role of being the brother. So at my birthdays and at holidays, I would get poems and greeting cards. And Dion and Amy thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever done, sending me these cards, being my imaginary twin brother. So that was cool. So the other night, I texted Amy and I was checking up on her, see how she was doing. She said, I'm doing good. And I said, hey, I'm praying to make sure you're staying strong and everything's good. She said, I appreciate that. And I said, hey, I told Ricky that he needed to pray for you too, but he didn't understand the concept of prayer. But he said he wanted some chocolate pudding and raisins. So if you could send him some, that'd be great. And so she called and laughed. She's like, dude, really? I'm like, I just had to do it. I said, so Ricky needs some pudding. So we decided, we did a podcast, and I had my girlfriend on, Amanda, and we had Amy on. And that entire show, they knew that I was going to propose on the podcast. They just knew it. And I didn't, because I didn't want to. I don't want to get engaged on a podcast. That's just dumb. It's super dumb. So we get done after the show, and they said, man, we really thought you were going to do that. And I said, you really think I would like get engaged on a podcast? I'm like, come on. But we decided Dion was ordained, that they would marry us. So it's like, well, this is great. We'll go somewhere. We'll find a cool place. We'll have the guys around, and we'll get married, and we'll do that. And we'll always have Dion on the marriage certificate. We ran out of time because Dion got sick, and we missed it. So Monday night, podcast guys come in. It was last Monday. We had a beer. We were celebrating Dion. And I realized that our good buddy Ron, that never misses a show unless he takes another job and travels across the country, he's ordained as well. So last Monday night, on the day of Dion's death, we got married. So it was cool. So instead of having a sad day, we had a great day. So that was a good thing too. With that being said, where do we go from here? You know, the day I did good until now. The day we all got the news, I decided that we would pack it up and be done, because our goal was to capture all the stories we could, and then once those stories are done, we're done. So I packed up the podcast, put it away, and thought we'll just hibernate it. So I got approached by someone last week, and we have decided that we have a new replacement for Reel Unfiltered Talk. And you guys are going to absolutely love him. I'm not going to say who he is, because we're going to hibernate the show for a while. We got to regroup. I'm going to put out some photos, some different videos, but we're really excited because the stories and the legends of old fishing will continue. So we're very excited about that. So there's new co-host coming. We're going to keep the history stories alive. So we're excited. And the guys, I think they all know who he is. So they've been bound to secrecy. So we'll be putting some clues out there as we go along. I've been digging up today. I had some CDs, believe it or not, CDs. I have computers that don't have CD players. So I have CDs full of old photos from the Hibdons that we scanned in back in the day. I found pictures of Guido holding, with President George H. Bush. Yeah, that's the first one. Holding Peyton as an infant. Signed autographs in the Hibdons. So we'll put up some of that stuff, because you always told stories about on the show. I fished with the president. I have proof. I did this. I have proof. So we're going to put up some old photos and do that. And we're going to move forward after we take a little break, because we're going to drink some beer and we're going to have a good time. And then we're going to train the new guy on how to be rude and unfiltered, for real, unfiltered. So, and this guy's no slouch. He was a pro too, and he fished many, many, many years, and he's very outspoken. So you guys are going to love him. To close out our show tonight, as we always do, we do the shameless plug. And I want to thank June and Lloyd out at Hiawatha Beach for everything they did for the last year and a half. But I have to say tonight that Lloyd is not doing well. He's very sick. So I'm asking you all to send out your prayers for Lloyd. And I told him he didn't have to pay us this month. So $100 is good. So I think we can float it. So, and Lloyd gave us money because he wanted to keep the podcast alive. That was his goal. He wanted to make sure that Dion kept talking, and if we could throw some money out there and we could buy a $59 microphone when one goes bad, it's cool. Even though Steve said they suck and he had to work on the sound a few times, but then he wouldn't do it again. So we're going to make him do that too. So thanks to our fans and everybody that's been with us for this whole time. And we're going to keep it alive. It's going to keep going. So stick with us. And we appreciate everything. And from all of us here at Reel Unfiltered Talk, keep your life jackets on and be safe. And we'll see you. Yep, green, red, all's well. Go ahead. When in danger or in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. Which means wear your life jackets and don't be stupid. And the fishing stories are going to keep coming. So you guys all be careful. Stay tuned. We'll put up some teasers and some images. And hopefully we will see you very soon. And with a Reel Unfiltered 2.0. You guys take care, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks. Bye-bye. Yeah.